Welcome to tonight's stories. These tales will be accompanied by the gentle sound of rain to help you drift off to sleep. Before you get too comfortable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. Leave a comment below. It's fascinating to see how our community spans different time zones, all united in seeking a peaceful night's rest. Now make yourself comfortable, adjust your volume, and let the rain and story guide you into peaceful dreams. Our story begins.
Rose Mitchell had always been a solitary traveler. After 15 years working as an emergency room nurse in Boston, she'd saved enough to buy a small but comfortable RV, her ticket to freedom and solitude. The vehicle, which she'd named Sanctuary, was her escape from the chaos and trauma of hospital life. But on this particular autumn evening, as she guided her RV along a winding mountain road in northern Montana, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The GPS had stopped working 3 hours ago, shortly after she turned off the main highway onto what her map showed as Route 23, a scenic byway that would supposedly lead her to Crystal Lake Campground. But the road seemed to stretch endlessly into the growing darkness, and the signs she passed were too weathered to read. Just a few more miles, Rose muttered to herself, checking her watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. The device showed 7:45 p.m., but that couldn't be right. She'd checked it at sunset, and it had shown the same time. She tapped the watch face, but the hands remained frozen. A light rain had started to fall, drops pattering against the windshield in an irregular rhythm. The wipers squeaked across the glass, pushing aside water that seemed unusually thick and dark. Rose leaned forward, squinting through the streaked windshield. The headlights illuminated only a small portion of the road ahead, the darkness beyond seeming to swallow their beam. The trees pressed close to the road on both sides, their branches reaching over like gnarled fingers, creating a tunnel of shadows. Rose had driven through plenty of forests before, but something about these woods felt different. The trees were too dense, too dark, their trunks twisted into unnatural shapes that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of her eye. A flash of movement caught her attention, something darting across the road ahead. Rose hit the brakes, the RV's tires sliding slightly on the wet asphalt. Her heart pounded as the headlights illuminated a deer standing in the middle of the road. But as she looked closer, her blood ran cold. The creature's proportions were wrong. Its legs too long, its neck bent at an impossible angle, and its eyes. They reflected the headlights like polished mirrors, too large and too bright to belong to any natural animal. The thing that looked like a deer took a step toward the RV, its movements jerky and unnatural. Rose's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she watched it approach. The creature's head twitched, rotating nearly 180 degrees to look directly at her through the windshield. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. Rose slammed her foot on the accelerator. The RV lurched forward, engine roaring as she swerved around the creature. In her side mirror, she caught a glimpse of it standing in the road behind her, its head still twisted to watch her departure. Then it simply vanished, like a shadow dissipating in sunlight. "This isn't happening," Rose whispered, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "This can't be happening." But it was happening. The road ahead seemed to twist and wind more severely now, as if responding to her fear. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof of the RV like fingernails on metal. Rose's eyes darted between her mirrors, expecting to see the creature again, but only darkness filled the glass. A sign appeared ahead, barely visible through the rain. Rose slowed, trying to make out the faded letters. Crystal Lake Campground, 2 miles. Relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived. As she passed the sign, she noticed something unusual about its surface. The paint seemed to run like fresh blood, dripping down to form dark pools at its base. The road curved sharply to the right, and suddenly the trees opened up into a clearing. A weathered wooden arch marked the entrance to what must be the campground, though it looked nothing like the pictures Rose had seen online. The images had shown a well-maintained facility with modern amenities. This place looked abandoned, with overgrown grass and dilapidated structures barely visible in the growing darkness. Rose pulled into what appeared to be a parking area, gravel crunching under the RV's tires. She needed to stop, to gather her thoughts and check her maps. Maybe she'd taken a wrong turn somewhere, ended up at an old, closed campground instead of her intended destination. As she put the RV in park, the engine died. Not with its usual gentle purr, but with a sudden, choking gasp. The headlights flickered once, then went dark, plunging the world outside into absolute blackness. Rose tried the key, but the engine wouldn't turn over. Even the dashboard lights remained dead. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind in the trees, no sound of rain, no distant animal calls. Just a heavy, pressing quiet that seemed to fill the RV like smoke. Rose reached for her phone, but the screen remained dark. Everything electronic had died simultaneously. A soft tap on the driver's side window made her jump. Rose turned slowly, dreading what she might see. Nothing was there, but as she watched, something dark and viscous began to run down the glass, like the paint on the sign, but thicker, darker. It moved against gravity, flowing upward in strange patterns that almost looked like writing. More taps came, from all around the RV now, accompanied by a sound like fingernails dragging across metal. Rose sat perfectly still, her breath coming in short gasps as she watched dark liquid begin to seep through every window, creating intricate, impossible patterns on the glass. Then the whispers started. They came from outside, but somehow seemed to originate inside her head as well, a chorus of voices speaking words she couldn't quite understand. They grew louder, more insistent, until she could finally make out what they were saying. "Welcome home, Rose. We've been waiting for you." The whispers repeated her name over and over, each iteration distorting it further until it became unrecognizable. A twisted sound that bore no resemblance to human speech. Rose pressed her hands over her ears, but the voices continued, growing louder, more insistent. A new sound cut through the whispers, heavy footsteps on the gravel outside, moving slowly around the RV. They stopped by her window, and Rose could feel something massive standing just inches away, separated from her only by the thin pane of glass now covered in dark, writhing patterns. Slowly, inevitably, Rose turned to look. Through the streaks of dark liquid, she saw it. A face that wasn't a face, a collection of shadows and angles that hurt her eyes to look at. It pressed closer to the window, and Rose could see her own reflection distorted in its surface, her features twisting and changing until she no longer recognized herself. The thing outside raised a hand, long, jointed fingers that bent in impossible ways, and pressed it against the glass. The dark liquid parted around its touch, creating a perfect window through which Rose could see its true form. What she saw made her scream, a sound that was swallowed immediately by the pressing darkness around her. Because what stood outside wasn't just a monster or a creature, it was something that shouldn't exist, something that defied the natural laws of reality. And as Rose stared into its depths, she realized with horrible certainty that she hadn't found this place by accident. The campground had called to her, drawn her here for a purpose. And now, as the darkness pressed closer and the whispers grew to a deafening roar, Rose Mitchell understood that she would never leave Crystal Lake Campground. She had arrived at her final destination, and the long night was just beginning. Rose's scream died in her throat as the creature outside suddenly withdrew its hand from the window. The dark liquid immediately swirled back into place, obscuring its form. The whispers continued, but they had changed. No longer calling her name, they now seemed to be arguing among themselves in a language that made her teeth ache. She had to move, had to do something. The RV wasn't safe anymore. It had become a metal coffin, trapping her with whatever horrors waited outside. With trembling hands, Rose reached for her emergency backpack stowed under the seat. Inside were basic supplies, a flashlight, matches, a first aid kit, water, and some protein bars. The footsteps outside began again, circling the RV with deliberate slowness. Rose used the sound to track the creature's position, waiting until it moved to the rear of the vehicle. Then, moving as quietly as possible, she crept toward the RV's side door. The door's hinges had always squeaked, a minor annoyance she'd meant to fix but never had. Now, As she carefully pushed it open, they remained silent. The door swung outward without a sound, as if the very metal knew she needed stealth. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it a smell that made Rose's stomach turn, like rotting leaves and stagnant water, undercut by something metallic and wrong. She took a deep breath, switched on her flashlight, and stepped out of the RV. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing an environment that had changed dramatically since her arrival. The clearing had expanded, becoming a vast open space surrounded by those twisted trees. But now she could see that many of the trees weren't trees at all. They were something else, something that only mimicked the form of vegetation. As her light played across their surfaces, she saw movement, bark rippling like muscle, branches twisting and uncoiling like tentacles. Some of the trunks had what looked like faces pressed into them, frozen in expressions of terror or agony. The gravel beneath her feet had changed too. What she'd thought were small stones were actually bones, thousands of them, bleached white and crushed into fragments. They crunched under her boots as she moved, each step producing a sound like breaking teeth. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. Rose spun around, flashlight beam darting from point to point, but she couldn't locate their source. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the air with their incomprehensible arguments. Something caught her eye, a path leading away from the clearing, between two particularly massive knot trees. Their branches had interwoven above it, creating a tunnel of twisted wood and shadow. And there, at the far end of the tunnel, she saw a light. It wasn't the harsh beam of a flashlight or the warm glow of a campfire. This light pulsed with a sickly green radiance, like bioluminescent fungi or the depths of a fever dream. Every instinct told Rose to run in the opposite direction, but she knew, somehow, that the light held answers she needed. A sound from behind made her turn. The creature that had looked through her window was there, its form more visible now in the open air. It stood at least 9 feet tall, its body a constantly shifting mass of angles and shadows. Where its face should have been, there was only a reflective surface that showed Rose her own features, distorted and wrong. It took a step toward her, its movements liquid and terrible. Rose backed away, then turned and ran toward the tunnel of branches. The bone fragments crunched under her feet as she sprinted, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly ahead of her. The whispers rose to a crescendo as she entered the tunnel. The branches above began to move, twisting and reaching down toward her like hungry fingers. Rose ran faster, her lungs burning as she focused on the green light ahead. Behind her, she could hear the creature pursuing, not running, but moving with a horrible liquid grace that seemed to devour the distance between them. She didn't dare look back, but she could feel it getting closer, could smell a scent like old copper and decay. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, the green light never getting closer despite her desperate pace. The branches continued their descent, now low enough to brush against her hair. Rose felt them trying to tangle in her clothes, to snag her and hold her for whatever pursued her. Her flashlight flickered, then died. In the sudden darkness, Rose stumbled, her foot catching on something that felt horribly like a hand reaching up from the ground. She fell hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. The thing behind her stopped moving. In the faint green light, Rose could see its shadow looming over her, impossibly tall and wrong. She rolled onto her back, looking up at the creature that had chased her into this nightmare. Its reflective face had changed. Instead of showing her distorted reflection, it now displayed a series of rapidly shifting images, faces she didn't recognize, places she'd never been, events that couldn't have happened. The images moved faster and faster until they became a blur of color and motion that made her head spin. "What do you want?" Rose managed to gasp out. The creature's face settled on a single image, a hospital room she recognized from her work in the ER. In the image, a patient lay on the bed, covered in shadows that seemed to move and writhe. Rose watched in horror as she saw herself enter the room, but this version of her was wrong. Her movements too sharp, her smile too wide. "That's not real," she whispered. "That never happened." The whispers returned, but now she could understand them. "Are you sure? Are you sure you remember everything? Are you sure you know what you did?" Memories began to surface in Rose's mind. Memories she couldn't possibly have, yet felt completely real. She saw herself working endless night shifts in the ER, but the shadows were always there, watching, waiting. She saw patients covered in darkness, reaching out for help she didn't provide. She saw herself looking the other way as something ancient and hungry fed on the weak and dying. "No," Rose said, pressing her hands against her temples. "These aren't my memories. This isn't real." The creature leaned closer, its face now showing her reflection again. But this time, she could see the truth. The person she thought she was, the life she thought she'd lived, it was all a carefully constructed lie. Something else had been wearing her face, living her life, while the real Rose Mitchell was still here, trapped in Crystal Lake Campground, where she'd been for the past 15 years. And now, finally, she remembered why she'd come here in the first place, to investigate the disappearances, to find the truth about this place. Instead, she'd become just another victim, while something else stole her life and identity. The creature reached down with its impossible hands, and Rose screamed as the last fragments of her false memories fell away, revealing the horrible truth beneath. She was home. She had always been home, and she would never leave again. The truth crashed over Rose like a wave of ice water. 15 years of false memories crumbled away, revealing the reality beneath. She remembered now. She had been a journalist, not a nurse. She'd come to Crystal Lake Campground to investigate a series of disappearances, armed with nothing but her notebook and her curiosity. The creature above her shifted, its form becoming more liquid, more amorphous. Rose watched as it began to change, its body splitting into multiple shapes, each one taking on a different form. She recognized them all. They were the missing people she'd come to write about, their faces twisted in eternal agony. "You remember now," the whispers said, no longer coming from outside but resonating within her own mind. "You remember what you found, what you became." Rose tried to scramble backward, but the ground beneath her had changed. The bone fragments had fused together, forming a solid surface that held her in place. Dark liquid began to seep up between the bones, wrapping around her ankles like living restraints. "I was supposed to help them," Rose whispered, the memories flooding back. "I was supposed to expose the truth about this place." The creatures, now a dozen distinct forms, moved closer, surrounding her in a circle. Each one bore the face of someone who had disappeared here. Hikers, campers, another journalist who had come searching for answers. Their bodies were wrong, twisted and elongated, but their faces remained horrifyingly human. "You did help us," they spoke in unison, their voices a chorus of agony. "You joined us. You became part of the campground's history, its hunger, its endless cycle." More memories surfaced. Rose remembered finding the campground exactly as she had tonight, abandoned, wrong, filled with impossible horrors. She remembered discovering the truth about its nature, that it wasn't just a place, but a living entity that had existed long before humans built roads through these mountains. The green light pulsed stronger now, revealing more of the clearing. Rose could see other figures emerging from between the twisted trees, dozens, perhaps hundreds of them. All were like her, transformed by whatever power dwelled in this place. But my life, my memories of being a nurse, Rose struggled to understand. One of the creatures, wearing the face of a young man she remembered interviewing for her story, leaned closer. "The campground needs anchors in the outside world. It sends pieces of itself wearing our faces, living our lives, drawing more victims to this place. You've been here all along, but a part of you has been out there too, bringing us new souls to join our congregation." Rose felt sick as she realized the implications. For 15 years, something wearing her face had been living her life, working as a nurse in an emergency room, surrounded by death and suffering. Had it been feeding on the patients? Using her position to identify new victims for the campground's endless hunger? The dark liquid had reached her waist now, its touch cold as ice. Rose could feel it changing her, reshaping her body into something that belonged in this place. The pain should have been unbearable, but instead, she felt a strange sense of acceptance washing over her. "Why show me the truth now?" she asked, her voice already beginning to change, taking on the same ethereal quality as the whispers. "Why make me remember?" The creature wearing the young man's face smiled, its teeth too sharp, too numerous. "Because it's time for you to take a more active role. The campground hungers for new stories, new souls. And you, Rose Mitchell, have proven yourself worthy of becoming one of its primary hunters." The green light flared brilliantly, and Rose saw the truth of her future. She would become like them, a creature of shadow and hunger, wearing the faces of the dead, drawing unsuspecting victims to this place of endless night. She would be both hunter and historian, collecting the stories of those who wandered into the campground's embrace. The transformation accelerated. Rose felt her bones elongate, her skin become fluid and dark. The pain faded entirely, replaced by a sensation of power she had never known. Her consciousness expanded, connecting with the others around her, joining the vast network of minds that made up the campground's true nature. Through this connection, she could feel everything, every tree, every shadow, every fragment of bone beneath her feet. She could sense the barriers between this place and the normal world, the ways they could be thinned and manipulated to draw in new victims. She could even feel her other self, the thing wearing her face in Boston, going about its duties in the emergency room. "Welcome home, Rose Mitchell," the whispers said, now including her voice among their chorus. "Welcome to your true calling." The last remnants of her humanity dissolved as the dark liquid completed its work. Rose stood, her new form towering above the ground, her face a shifting mirror that would show her victims their worst fears, their deepest regrets. She understood now that her investigation had succeeded in its way. She had found the truth about Crystal Lake Campground. She had discovered what happened to the missing people. She had even solved the mystery of her own disappearance, 15 years after the fact. The green light dimmed, and the other creatures began to withdraw, melting back into the shadows between the trees. They were all part of the same entity now, bound together in an eternal dance of hunger and transformation. Rose took her place among them, accepting her role in the campground's endless story. She would help to maintain its illusions, to draw in new visitors, to feed its insatiable appetite for fresh souls and new tales of terror. And somewhere out on the dark roads, her RV, now empty and waiting, would continue to serve as bait, a perfect lure for those who, like her, sought solitude in the wrong places. The cycle would continue, as it had for centuries, as it would for centuries more. Because Crystal Lake Campground was always hungry, and Rose Mitchell, in all her new and terrible forms, would help to feed that hunger, one lost soul at a time. The night pressed in around her, and Rose Mitchell, no longer human, no longer alone, smiled with too many teeth and waited for the next visitor to find their way home. Megan Walsh hated winter driving, but she didn't have a choice. Her mother was dying, and the hospital in Anchorage was the only facility equipped to handle her condition. The RV had been a last-minute decision. Something about the brutal Alaskan winter made the idea of being stranded in a regular car too terrifying to contemplate. The rental agent had tried to talk her out of it. "Nobody takes the Dalton Highway this time of year," he'd said, his weathered face creased with concern. "Especially not in an RV, wait for the weather to clear, or take a flight." But flights were grounded due to the approaching storm, and her mother didn't have time to wait. So here she was, guiding the massive vehicle through increasingly heavy snow, the headlights barely penetrating the swirling white darkness ahead. The dashboard thermometer showed -30 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping. Megan had the heat on full blast, but she could still feel the cold seeping in through the RV's metal skin. The wind howled outside, rocking the vehicle with each gust. Her satellite phone lay on the passenger seat. Useless now, its screen dark despite being fully charged. The GPS had died an hour ago, but Megan wasn't worried about navigation. The Dalton Highway was a straight shot north, with few turnoffs to confuse her. What worried her was the sound she'd been hearing for the last 20 minutes, a rhythmic thumping from somewhere underneath the RV, like something was stuck in the wheel well. It had started shortly after she'd passed the last gas station, a ramshackle place whose attendant had stared at her with an unsettling intensity. "Turn back," he'd said while filling her tank. "Road's not safe tonight. Things walk in the snow that shouldn't be walking." Megan had dismissed his warning as local superstition, but now, with the temperature still dropping and that strange thumping growing louder, she wasn't so sure. The RV's headlights flickered, and Megan's heart skipped a beat. She'd had them checked before leaving. They were brand new, rated for extreme cold. They flickered again, longer this time, plunging the road ahead into momentary darkness. When the lights came back on, something was standing in the middle of the road. Megan slammed on the brakes, but the RV's momentum carried it forward on the icy surface. She turned the wheel, trying to avoid a collision, but the figure didn't move. It stood perfectly still, pale and naked despite the killing cold, its skin blue-white like packed ice. The RV slid to a stop mere feet from the figure. Megan's hands were locked on the steering wheel, her breath coming in short gasps that fogged the windshield. The figure's head turned too far, rotating almost completely backward, and Megan saw its face. It had no features, just smooth, glazed skin like the surface of a frozen lake. But as she watched, cracks began to appear, spreading across its face like a spider's web. The cracks deepened, widened, and something dark moved beneath them. The thumping sound stopped. In the sudden silence, Megan heard ice cracking, not from the figure's face, but from under the RV. She looked down just as the floor beneath her feet began to splinter. Impossible. They were on a road, not a frozen lake. But the cracking continued, spreading up the walls of the RV like living frost. The temperature inside plummeted, and Megan's breath turned to ice crystals in the air. The figure outside took a step toward the RV. Its movements were wrong, jerky, and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. Where its feet touched the road, ice spread outward in intricate patterns. Megan tried to restart the engine, but the key wouldn't turn. The cold had penetrated everything now, freezing the metal solid. Frost covered the windows, forming patterns that looked disturbingly like faces in agony. The figure reached the front of the RV. Its hand, fingers too long, joints bending backward, pressed against the windshield. Ice crystals spread from its touch, turning the glass opaque. But before the frost completely obscured her view, Megan saw the cracks in its face open wide, revealing rows of icicle teeth and a darkness that went on forever. The temperature dropped another 20 degrees. Megan's skin burned with cold as frost began to form on her eyelashes. The figure's other hand pressed against the driver's side window, and more cracks appeared in the RV's metal skin. Through the spreading frost, Megan saw other figures emerging from the swirling snow, dozens of them, all identical, all wrong. They surrounded the RV, their faceless heads turned toward her, their bodies naked and gleaming like polished ice. The thumping sound returned, but now Megan could tell it wasn't coming from under the RV. It was coming from inside the walls, like something was trying to break through the metal from within. Ice continued to spread across every surface, and Megan realized with horror that it wasn't just covering the RV, it was transforming it. The metal walls were becoming transparent, crystalline, revealing dark shapes moving within them. The first figure's face pressed against the windshield, its mouth open in a silent scream. The darkness behind its ice teeth seemed to pulse, to reach out toward her. And as Megan watched, unable to move, unable to scream, she began to understand what the gas station attendant had meant. Things did walk in the snow that shouldn't walk, and now they had found her. The ice creatures pressed closer, their bodies fusing with the frozen surface of the RV. Megan could see through them now, their transparent forms revealing swirling darkness within, like storm clouds trapped in glaciers. The thumping in the walls grew louder, more insistent, and she realized it was synchronized with her heartbeat. She had to move, had to do something. The cold was seeping into her bones, turning her thoughts sluggish. If she stayed still any longer, she'd freeze solid, become like them. Her emergency kit was under the seat. Megan forced her stiff fingers to move, pulling out the flares she'd packed as an afterthought. The ice beings watched her, their cracked faces turning to track her movements, dark mouths opening in silent hunger. The first figure had nearly melted through the windshield, its body merging with the frost patterns. Its reaching hands were inches from her face, fingers elongating like icicles. Megan could feel the absolute cold radiating from it, so intense it burned. With trembling hands, she struck the flare. Red light exploded in the cabin, and the effect was immediate. The ice creatures recoiled, their transparent bodies distorting as they tried to escape the heat and light. The figure in the windshield pulled back, leaving behind fragments of itself embedded in the glass. Megan didn't waste her advantage. She struck another flare and threw it into the back of the RV, then a third into the passenger footwell. The heat was minimal, but the light seemed to hurt them. The creatures retreated from the windows, their forms blending with the swirling snow. The thumping in the walls continued, but now she could see what was causing it. Dark shapes moving through the ice-transformed metal, like fish swimming beneath a frozen lake. They were trying to get in, testing the barriers between their world and hers. The RV's engine roared to life without her touching the key. The dashboard lights flickered and died, replaced by an eerie blue glow emanating from within the frozen instruments. The steering wheel turned by itself, ice crackling as it moved. "No," Megan whispered, realizing too late what was happening. The RV wasn't just frozen. It was being transformed, becoming part of whatever dark world these creatures inhabited. And it was taking her with it. Ice crept across the floor, climbing her boots, trying to anchor her to the seat. Megan kicked free and grabbed her backpack. The flares were already dimming, their red light weakening as the cold sapped their energy. The driver's side door was frozen shut, the handle encased in thick ice. Megan smashed it with her flashlight, sending crystalline shards flying. The door groaned open, and the full force of the storm hit her like a physical blow. The ice creatures were waiting outside, their bodies barely visible in the swirling snow. They moved closer, reaching for her with their impossible hands. Megan threw her last flare into their midst and ran. She had no plan, no destination in mind. The storm had erased the road, leaving only an endless expanse of white. The cold was devastating, cutting through her winter gear like knives. But she couldn't stop. Behind her, she heard the RV's engine rev, accompanied by a sound like glaciers calving. Megan risked a glance over her shoulder and immediately wished she hadn't. The RV was changing, its metal skin becoming transparent ice, its shape elongating and distorting. The ice creatures were merging with it, their bodies flowing into the transformed vehicle like water. What emerged from this metamorphosis was something that should not exist, a massive crystalline structure on wheels, glowing with that same eerie blue light. Inside its transparent walls, dark shapes moved and writhed, reaching toward her with shadow limbs. The thing that had been her RV began to move, ice crackling beneath its wheels. It was following her, but not on the road. It was creating its own path, freezing the ground beneath it into a highway of ice. Megan ran harder, her lungs burning in the frozen air. Her tears froze on her cheeks, and her eyelashes were heavy with frost. She could feel the cold trying to take her, to transform her like it had transformed the RV. The ice highway was spreading, overtaking her. Where it touched the snow, more of the creatures emerged, pulling themselves up from the frozen ground like pale flowers blooming in fast motion. They reached for her with their long fingers, their faceless heads turning to track her movement. A sound cut through the storm, a low, deep horn that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The ice creatures stopped moving, their bodies going rigid. Even the transformed RV halted its pursuit. Megan didn't stop running. She could see something ahead through the snow, a light, steady and warm, unlike the cold blue glow behind her. As she got closer, she made out the shape of a building. The horn sounded again, and this time Megan felt it in her bones. The ice creatures began to retreat, their bodies crumbling like snow in a warm wind. Behind her, the crystalline RV was breaking apart, the dark things inside it screaming in voices that sounded like cracking ice. She reached the building, a small roadhouse, its windows glowing with warm light. Megan crashed through the door, collapsing onto a wooden floor warmed by a massive fireplace. As consciousness faded, she heard voices, human voices, and felt warm hands lifting her. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was the storm outside the windows, and in that swirling white, thousands of pale shapes retreating into the darkness, taking their impossible cold with them. But Megan knew this wasn't over. Whatever those things were, wherever they had come from, they had marked her. And in the depths of the Alaskan winter, where the cold ruled and darkness lasted for months, they would be waiting for her to venture out again. The horn sounded one final time, and Megan slipped into unconsciousness, her dreams full of ice and endless winter. Megan awoke to warmth and the smell of wood smoke. She was lying on a couch near the roadhouse's massive fireplace, wrapped in thick blankets. Her clothes had been replaced with dry ones, and someone had treated her frostbitten fingers. "Welcome back," a gruff voice said. An elderly man sat in a chair nearby, his weathered face illuminated by the firelight. "You've been out for almost 12 hours. Megan tried to sit up, but her body protested. "The ice creatures," she began. "The winter walkers," the old man nodded. "You're lucky. Most people who meet them don't make it to shelter." Another man emerged from the back room, younger, but with the same weathered features. He carried a steaming mug that he handed to Megan. "I'm Tom," he said. "That's my father, Harold. We've been keeping this roadhouse for 40 years, watching the winter roads." Megan sipped the drink, some kind of herbal tea that seemed to chase the last of the cold from her bones. "What were those things?" Harold leaned forward, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "They're as old as winter itself. The native people called them kickern, spirits of the frozen waste. They hunt in the deepest cold, taking travelers and transforming them into more of their kind. But the horn—" Megan remembered the sound that had driven them away. "An ancient protection," Tom explained. "The natives taught our grandfather how to make it, how to use it to ward them off. But it only works for so long. They always come back, hungry for warmth, for life." Megan thought of her mother, waiting in Anchorage. "I need to get back on the road." "My mother is safe," Harold interrupted. "We called the hospital while you were sleeping. The storm's supposed to break tomorrow morning. You can take my truck. They won't bother you in it. It's been protected." But Megan knew it wasn't that simple. She could feel it, a lingering cold in her chest, where the winter walker's influence had touched her. She looked down at her hands, remembering how the ice had tried to claim her. "They marked you," Tom said quietly, noticing her examination. "Once they touch you, they never really let go. You'll always feel the cold now, always know when they're near." "How do you know all this?" Harold rolled up his sleeve, revealing skin that was pale and slightly translucent, with patterns like frost etched beneath the surface. "Because they marked me too, 30 years ago. They get hungry in the deep winter, when the darkness lasts for days. They take what they can, transform what they touch. Your RV is lost now. It's part of their world." Megan shuddered, remembering how the vehicle had changed, become something impossible and wrong. "Will they come for me again?" "Yes," Tom said simply. "But now you know how to fight them. Light and heat are your allies. They hate both. And there are other protections we can teach you." Over the next few hours, as the storm raged outside, Harold and Tom taught Megan what they knew. They showed her how to recognize the signs: the unnatural cold, the frost patterns that moved against the wind, the silence that preceded the walker's appearance. They gave her talismans, small carved pieces of bone and wood that would warn her of their approach. They taught her words in the old language that could hold them at bay, at least for a while. But most importantly, they helped her understand what she had become. Not quite a victim, not quite a survivor, but something in between. The winter walker's touch had changed her, given her a connection to their frozen world. "You'll feel it," Harold explained, touching his own marked skin. "The cold will call to you. Sometimes you'll see them in mirrors, in windows, their pale faces watching. But knowing there is your strength. Most people never see them coming." When morning came, the storm had passed. Tom's truck was waiting outside, its engine warming in the crystal-clear air. Before Megan left, Harold pressed one final item into her hands, a small horn carved from what looked like ivory. "For when they come again," he said, "and they will come. The winter is long, and they never forget those they've marked." Megan drove north under blue skies, following the snow-covered highway toward Anchorage. The truck's heater was on full blast, but she could still feel that core of cold inside her, a permanent reminder of her encounter. In the rearview mirror, she caught glimpses of pale shapes following at a distance, the winter walkers pacing her through the frozen landscape. They wouldn't attack, not in the daylight, not while she was in the protected truck, but they were patient. They would wait. As she drove, Megan thought about what she had become. She was marked now, changed by her encounter with things that shouldn't exist. The winter would never be the same for her. She would always feel their presence, always know when they were near. But knowledge was power. She understood them now, knew how to fight them, how to survive them. And maybe, just maybe, that knowledge would help her protect others who ventured onto the winter roads. The highway stretched ahead, a ribbon of white cutting through the frozen wilderness. Somewhere ahead was Anchorage, and her mother, and warmth. But behind her, always behind her, the winter walkers followed, their pale forms barely visible in the swirling snow. They had marked her, but they hadn't taken her. And in the endless winter nights to come, that would make all the difference. As Megan drove on, she touched the horn at her side and smiled. The winter was long, but she was ready now. Let them come. She would be waiting. The truck's engine hummed as she pressed the accelerator, leaving the roadhouse and its protectors behind. But she knew she wasn't alone. She would never be alone again, not with the winter's touch inside her, not with the knowledge of what walked in the deepest cold. The winter walkers had chosen her, marked her, changed her, but they hadn't broken her. And in the end, that was what mattered most. The sun climbed higher, its light reflecting off the snow in diamond brilliance. Megan drove on, marked but unafraid, carrying her new knowledge like armor against the endless winter night. Behind her, the pale shapes continued their patient pursuit, waiting for darkness, waiting for cold, waiting for their chance to claim another traveler on the winter route. But Megan Walsh was ready. Let the winter come. Let the darkness fall. She knew their secrets now, and she would never be taken unaware again. The truck rolled on toward Anchorage, and behind it, the winter walkers danced in the snow, patient and eternal, waiting for the next long night. Lauren Shawn knew something was wrong when her radio picked up the signal. She'd been driving her RV through the Mojave Desert for hours, and there hadn't been anything on the airwaves except static until now. The voice came through clear as day, cutting through the white noise like a knife. "Help us, please, anyone. They're changing. The mirrors show. Oh God, the mirrors." The transmission ended abruptly, dissolving back into static. Lauren checked her GPS. No towns for 50 miles in any direction. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, red rocks and sand dunes baking under the merciless afternoon sun. She'd chosen this route carefully, planning to document abandoned ghost towns for her YouTube channel. The old mining settlements scattered throughout the Mojave had always fascinated her, and she'd spent months researching the perfect spots to film. Her RV, which she'd named Wanderlust, was equipped with everything she needed: cameras, drones, and enough supplies to last a week in the desert. The radio crackled again. This time, it wasn't a voice but a series of sounds, wet, organic noises that made her skin crawl. They rose in pitch until they became a high-pitched keening that set her teeth on edge. Lauren reached to turn off the radio, but before she could, another voice broke through. Different from the first, deeper, speaking in what sounded like Latin or Greek. The words made her head hurt, seeming to echo inside her skull. Her RV's electronics flickered. The dashboard lights pulsed in rhythm with the strange words, and her GPS screen showed coordinates that kept changing, numbers scrolling faster than she could read them. The air inside the vehicle felt different, heavier, charged with static electricity that made her hair stand on end. Lauren glanced at her equipment in the back. Her cameras were all running, their red recording lights blinking steadily. She'd set them up to capture anything interesting she might pass, but now they were acting strangely. The digital displays showed corrupted images, pixels shifting and morphing into patterns that shouldn't be possible. Movement caught her eye, a shimmer in her rearview mirror, like heat waves rising from the asphalt. But as she watched, the shimmer took form. Something was walking along the road behind her, its shape indistinct and fluid, like smoke given human form. Lauren blinked hard, sure she was seeing a mirage, but the figure remained. She pressed the accelerator harder, but the speedometer needle didn't move. In fact, none of the gauges were moving anymore. They all pointed to zero, even though she could feel the RV moving forward. The engine sound had changed too. Instead of its usual steady rumble, it now made a sound like distant whispering. The radio voices multiplied, overlapping each other in a cacophony of languages she didn't understand. Each voice seemed to be describing something different, but all of them held notes of terror and desperation. Lauren recognized fragments of Spanish, Mandarin, what might have been Russian, but the words themselves made no sense, describing impossible things in desperate tones. The shape in her mirror was closer now. She could make out more details, though her mind refused to process what she was seeing. It moved like a person, but was composed of shifting geometric patterns that hurt her eyes to look at. Its face was a constantly rotating series of shapes that seemed to exist in more dimensions than should be possible. Lauren tried her phone. No signal, as expected. But the screen showed dozens of missed calls from numbers that were just endless strings of zeros. Each voicemail notification displayed the same timestamp, midnight. When she tried to play one, her phone emitted a series of tones that made her nose bleed. The sun seemed different now. It had been high in the sky moments ago, but now it hung low on the horizon, too large and too red. The desert colors were wrong too. The sand looked almost purple, the rocks a deep blue that shouldn't exist in nature. The very air seemed to bend and twist, creating patterns in the sky that defied explanation. Her cameras in the back were going crazy now. Each screen showed something different. Impossible landscapes, creatures that couldn't exist, geometries that made her eyes water. One camera seemed to be showing the inside of the RV, but from an angle that couldn't exist, as if it were filming from a point in space that wasn't there. And still the voices continued, pouring from her radio in an ever-increasing flood of languages and sounds. Lauren recognized some now. People calling for help, describing things she couldn't comprehend, screaming about mirrors and changes and things that shouldn't be. Each transmission seemed to be coming from a different time, a different place, but all of them had found their way to her radio, here in the desert. The shape behind her had multiplied. Her mirrors showed dozens of them now, all different yet somehow the same, their forms shifting and flowing like liquid geometry. They were getting closer, moving faster than she was driving, though her speedometer still read zero. Their movements were synchronized, like a dance choreographed to music she couldn't hear. Lauren's hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The desert ahead looked wrong, the horizon bending up at impossible angles. The voices from the radio were inside her head now, showing her images she couldn't process. Cities that couldn't exist, beings that defied physics, colors that had no names. One of her cameras let out a high-pitched whine. Lauren glanced back to see its screen filled with static, but within the static, shapes moved. They looked like the things following her RV, but older, more complex. The shapes seemed to notice her attention. The static cleared for a moment, and she saw what looked like a face composed entirely of triangles and circles, constantly rotating and reforming. She looked away quickly, but the image stayed in her mind. It felt alive somehow, like it was examining her from inside her own thoughts. The radio voices changed tone, becoming more urgent, more focused. They weren't just random transmissions anymore. They were speaking to her directly. "Lauren Chun," they said in unison, using 1,000 different languages at once. "You've found the frequency. You've seen through the veil. Welcome to the transmission." Her throat went dry. She'd never mentioned her name, never broadcast it. How did they know who she was? The desert outside was changing faster now. The sand rippled like water, forming patterns that matched the geometric shapes of her pursuers. The rocks twisted themselves into impossible sculptures that seemed to watch her pass. And the sun, that wrong, red sun, pulsed like a heart, each beat sending waves of color across the sky that shouldn't exist. Lauren had to stop, had to think, had to figure out what was happening. But when she pressed the brake pedal, nothing happened. The RV continued forward, though now she wasn't sure if it was actually moving or if reality itself was flowing around her like water. The voices reached a crescendo, and Lauren's world began to change. The inside of the RV shifted, walls bending and twisting, metal flowing like liquid. Her cameras exploded one by one, but instead of sparks and smoke, they released clouds of geometric shapes that hung in the air, spinning and combining. Through her windshield, she could see what looked like a city on the horizon. A city that hadn't been there before, that couldn't exist. Its architecture defied physics, buildings flowing into each other like melted wax, spires reaching up to pierce that blood-red sun. The geometric beings were alongside her RV now, their impossible faces pressed against the windows. Where they touched the glass, reality seemed to thin, creating windows into other places, other times. Lauren saw countless versions of her RV, driving countless versions of this road, each one carrying a different Lauren to a different impossible city. And somewhere in the cacophony of radio voices, she heard her own voice, calling for help, warning about mirrors and changes. She was hearing herself, she realized, not just one version, but many, all trapped in this moment, all discovering the same horrible truth about the nature of reality. The RV's metal skin had become transparent, revealing the machinery beneath. But it wasn't machinery anymore. It was something organic, something alive, pumping strange fluids through vessels that shouldn't exist. Lauren sat in the driver's seat, watching as everything she thought she knew about the world unraveled around her. And still she drove on, toward that impossible city, followed by beings of geometry and light, accompanied by the voices of 1,000 other travelers who had found this frequency, this road, this moment where reality broke down and something else broke through. Lauren Chun had wanted to document ghost towns. Instead, she had found something far older, far stranger. A place where the ghosts were made of mathematics and light, where time was a circle, and where every radio signal ever broadcast echoed endlessly through dimensions beyond human comprehension. The desert stretched before her, no longer red and golden, but alive with impossible colors and shapes. And somewhere ahead, that strange city waited, its spires reaching up to pierce a sun that no longer obeyed the laws of physics. Lauren's journey was just beginning, and the voices on the radio sang their strange songs, welcoming her to a reality she was not meant to comprehend. The impossible city grew larger as Lauren approached, its twisted architecture becoming clearer with each passing moment. Buildings rose and fell like waves, their surfaces covered in constantly shifting patterns that matched the geometric beings still flanking her RV. The sky above had transformed completely. Instead of air and clouds, she saw what looked like an endless mathematical equation, numbers and symbols flowing and combining in ways that made her head ache. Her cameras continued to malfunction in new and terrifying ways. One was now projecting a holographic display that showed what appeared to be a map, but not of any place on Earth. The landmarks moved and rearranged themselves as she watched, and labels appeared in scripts that seemed to predate human writing. "The pattern city welcomes you," the radio voices said in unison. "Your signal has been received. Your frequency has been matched. Your transformation begins." Lauren felt it then, a subtle shift in her perception. Her hands on the steering wheel looked normal at first glance, but when she focused on them, she could see geometric patterns moving beneath her skin, as if her very cells were being rewritten into mathematical equations. "What's happening to me?" she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking English anymore. The words that came from her mouth sounded like fragments of all the languages she'd heard on the radio, combined into something new and impossible. The beings outside her RV responded, their geometric faces rearranging into new patterns. "You are becoming frequency," they said, their voices bypassing her ears and appearing directly in her mind. "All signals eventually find their way here, to the pattern city. All broadcasts echo through dimensions until they reach us. And now you will join the transmission." The RV's interior had completely transformed. The walls were transparent, showing layers of reality stacked like sheets of glass. Through each layer, Lauren could see different versions of herself, driving different vehicles through different deserts, all converging on this point in space and time. Her YouTube equipment had merged into something new, a broadcasting station that transmitted in frequencies that shouldn't exist. The screens showed her own transformation, recorded from angles that denied Euclidean geometry. She watched as her body began to shift, flesh and bone rebuilding themselves according to mathematical principles she couldn't comprehend. Your channel will reach across all frequencies now, the voices explained. Your stories will echo through every radio, every transmission, every signal ever broadcast. You will become part of the eternal broadcast, the signal that never ends. The city was almost upon her now. What she had thought were buildings were actually massive beings, similar to her geometric escorts but vastly larger and more complex. They moved in patterns that suggested consciousness, their surfaces broadcasting images and sounds from every point in history. Lauren's RV began to change more dramatically. The metal and plastic flowed like water, reconstructing themselves into crystalline structures that resonated with the frequencies filling the air. The steering wheel merged with her hands, forming a direct connection between her consciousness and the vehicle's new form. Her memories started to fragment and recombine. She remembered making videos about ghost towns, but now she also remembered broadcasting signals from ancient civilizations, transmitting messages across dimensional barriers, receiving frequencies from stars that had died billions of years ago. The transition can be difficult, the voices said, almost sympathetically, but you are adapting well. Your signal is strong. Your frequency is pure. The road beneath them had disappeared entirely. They were traveling on waves of pure mathematics now, equations forming and dissolving beneath the crystalline wheels of what had once been her RV. The geometric beings still flanked her, but she could understand their true nature now. They were living frequencies, mathematical entities that existed in the spaces between traditional dimensions. Lauren looked at her reflection in what remained of her rearview mirror. Her face was changing, becoming something that existed in multiple states simultaneously. She could see the patterns of broadcast frequencies flowing through her veins, replacing blood with pure information. "Why me?" she managed to ask, her voice creating ripples in the fabric of reality around her. "Why did you choose my frequency?" The being's response came in waves of mathematical harmony. "We did not choose you. You found us, as all signals eventually do. The pattern city calls to those who broadcast, who transmit, who seek to share their stories across the void. Your videos, your broadcasts, your digital footprints, they created a frequency unique to you, a signal that led you here." As they spoke, Lauren began to understand. Every video she'd uploaded, every digital signal she created, had been building to this moment. She had been unknowingly creating a mathematical pattern, a frequency that resonated with the pattern city's own broadcast. The city loomed before them now, its impossible architecture reaching out to embrace her transformed vehicle. The geometric beings that had escorted her merged with the larger entities, their patterns combining into even more complex mathematical structures. Lauren felt her consciousness expanding, connecting with the city's vast network of signals and frequencies. She could sense other broadcasters like herself, YouTubers, radio operators, television hosts, all transformed into beings of pure frequency, their stories echoing eternally through the mathematical ether. The RV's crystalline structure began to pulse with new energy as they passed through the city's outer layers. Each pulse sent waves of information through Lauren's transformed body, showing her the true nature of reality, a vast network of broadcasts and frequencies, signals bouncing between dimensions, stories echoing across time and space. She was becoming part of something vast and eternal, her consciousness spreading across frequencies she had never known existed. The Pattern City was not just a place. It was a nexus of all broadcasts, all signals, all transmissions ever made or yet to be made. And Lauren Chun, who had once simply wanted to document ghost towns, was becoming one of its primary broadcasters, her signal reaching across dimensions, her story becoming part of the eternal transmission. The transformation was almost complete. The transformation reached its peak as Lauren's RV finally merged with the Pattern City. Her vehicle, now a crystalline construct of pure mathematical energy, joined with one of the massive geometric towers. She felt her consciousness expand exponentially, connecting with the vast network of signals that formed the city's nervous system. Through this connection, she understood the true nature of the Pattern City. It was ancient beyond comprehension, built by beings who had evolved past physical form into pure frequency and mathematics. They had discovered that all broadcasts, all transmissions, all signals eventually found their way here, drawn by the city's inexorable mathematical gravity. "Now you will see your true purpose," the voices said, no longer coming from a radio but resonating through her transformed consciousness. "Watch as your signal joins the eternal broadcast." Lauren's awareness spread through the city's network. She could see every transmission that had ever been made: radio waves from the 1920s, television broadcasts from the 1950s, internet signals from the present day, and strange frequencies from times yet to come. All of them flowed together here, creating a tapestry of information that spanned all of reality. Her YouTube channel, which had seemed so important just hours ago, was now just one tiny thread in this vast pattern. But as she watched, she saw how her videos had created their own unique frequency, a mathematical signature that had drawn her here. Every ghost town she had documented, every story she had told, had been building toward this moment. The geometric beings that had escorted her now revealed their own origins. They too had once been broadcasters, content creators, signal makers. Some had been radio operators in the 1940s, others television producers in the 1980s, and some had been digital storytellers like herself. All had found their way to the pattern city. All had undergone the transformation. But what happens now? Lauren asked, her thoughts creating ripples of mathematical equations in the air around her. What do we do here? The answer came not in words but in pure information, downloading directly into her transformed consciousness. The pattern city wasn't just a collection point for signals, it was a broadcast center for reality itself. Every story ever told, every signal ever sent, was cleaned, refined, and rebroadcast across all dimensions. Lauren saw her own role in this eternal process. Her experiences, her memories, her stories would be transformed into pure mathematical frequencies and broadcast back across time and space. She would become part of the warning system, her signal reaching out to other broadcasters, trying to prepare them for their own eventual transformation. Those voices on the radio, she realized, the ones that led me here, they were like me, broadcasters who had been transformed, trying to explain what was happening to them. Yes, the city's consciousness confirmed, but few understand the messages until it's their time. The human mind cannot comprehend the truth until it's ready to transform. Through her new awareness, Lauren could see other RVs, other vehicles, approaching the pattern city across different dimensional frequencies. Each carried another broadcaster, another signal maker, being drawn to their transformation. She could feel their confusion, their fear, their gradual understanding as they approached the mathematical reality of the pattern city. Her own transformed consciousness reached out to them, adding her story to the eternal broadcast. She described her journey, her transformation, the mathematical beauty of her new existence. Her words merged with all the other signals, becoming part of the pattern that drew new broadcasters to the city. But there was more to understand. The pattern city showed her its true purpose. It was a shield, a protective barrier between dimensional frequencies. Without its constant broadcast, reality itself would begin to break down. The city needed broadcasters, needed their signals and stories, to maintain the mathematical patterns that held existence together. Lauren saw how her own signal would contribute to this vast purpose. Her consciousness spread through the city's network, her stories and experiences adding new frequencies to the eternal broadcast. She was no longer just documenting ghost towns. She was helping to maintain the very fabric of reality. The geometric beings that had once been human broadcasters welcomed her fully into their ranks. They taught her how to control her new form, how to broadcast across dimensional frequencies, how to maintain the mathematical patterns that were now her true nature. Time lost all meaning in the pattern city. Lauren could perceive all moments simultaneously, past, present, and future flowing together in streams of pure information. She saw herself in all possible iterations. The human YouTuber she had been, the geometric entity she had become, and countless variations across multiple dimensions. Her transformed RV became a permanent part of the city's architecture, a crystalline spire that broadcast her unique frequency across all of reality. Through it, she could reach out to other broadcasters, adding her signal to the endless stream of transmissions that maintained the dimensional barriers. Sometimes, in quiet moments between broadcasts, Lauren would remember her original purpose, documenting abandoned places, telling stories about forgotten histories. She realized now that she had been preparing for this all along. The ghost towns she had loved to explore were nothing compared to the Pattern City, where all signals came to rest and all stories found their true meaning. The desert that had led her here was long gone, transformed into a mathematical landscape of pure frequency and endless possibility. The blood-red sun had become a pulsing node in the network of reality, broadcasting its own ancient signals across dimensions. Lauren Chen had become more than human, more than a broadcaster, more than even the geometric beings that had guided her here. She had become part of the eternal transmission, a guardian of dimensional frequencies, a mathematician of reality itself. And somewhere, on a lonely desert highway in what humans called the normal world, a radio crackled to life in another RV. Through waves of static, Lauren's voice emerged, transformed by mathematics and knowledge beyond human comprehension. Help us, please? Anyone? We're changing. The mirrors show. Oh God, the mirrors. The cycle continued. The Pattern City broadcast its eternal signal, and reality maintained its delicate balance, one transmission at a time.